Hello, and welcome to a special edition of Up Close on METV. I'm Charles Clapsaddle, station manager for Manatee Educational Television. And on this special edition of Up Close, we're very pleased and proud to have with us Judge John Lakin. Judge, thank you very much for coming and taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us a little bit. We've often felt that, when legal issues, it's really important to get an understanding of those people that are kind of behind the scenes, the people that make it happen, and to get some insight into your perspectives and about your background and the things that are important to you is a really valuable thing for this community.
Sure, it's great to be here.
Now, Judge, you're not from around these parts, are you?
Originally, no. I've been in Florida now for, 14 or 15 years, but I originally was a lawyer in Boston, Massachusetts. I was raised in Boston for 10 years. Then I relocated to Florida, and I was a lawyer in Florida for 13 years before I was elected in 2012 to the bench. And I'm sitting now in the felony division, which the 12th Judicial Circuit encompasses Sarasota, Manatee, and DeSoto counties. And I'm currently sitting in this felony division in Manatee County.
Well, and as a judge, being on the felony, you obviously have a great deal. What's the kind of caseload for an average judge?
There's 6 felony circuit judges that handle the Sarasota and Manatee counties, and roughly we vary probably from 300 to 400 files per judge for felony cases. So 3 in Manatee and 3 in Sarasota. So as you can imagine, the volume's very high. It's one of the busiest divisions of the 5 divisions in the circuit. So for sure, it's a very high-profile court, and there's a great deal of emotions and a great deal of activity that goes on in the courtroom.
Well, we want to get into some of the characteristics of being a judge and some of the challenges of that. But I'd like to, if we may, to kind of take you through a little backstory. Growing up in Boston, you have a brother. Tell us about your brother as well.
I have a twin brother, identical twin brother. Believe it or not, there's 2 of us. And my brother Kenny, and he's in Boston. He's an accomplished lawyer. He's done very well in sports entertainment law. Represented professional athletes, NFL, mainly football players and actors and entertainers, and I did some work with Ken for a number of years in Boston and in Florida, representing entertainers and athletes, as well as most of my career in litigation, in criminal and civil litigation. But he's an interesting character. He's great to be around, and we've had a lot of great fun in the law.
But growing up in Boston, as you and your brother, you came from kind of rather humble beginnings. Can you tell us a little bit about your growing up as a young man?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was very fortunate to have a mother and father who both were from really blue collar communities. My father was born in Maine, but then he moved to the Boston area. He was a mailman at Harvard University for 40 years, and my mother was a secretary at Harvard, and my father would basically deliver mail at Harvard and Harvard Law School. And I can remember as a young kid, maybe 8 or 9, 10 years old, my father would take my twin brother and I and walk us through the Harvard Law campus and really push education on us and say that education's the route to success in many ways. And so I think just seeing my father's dedication for 40 years to one job, his discipline to walk through snow, rain, whatever it was, to do what he needed to do as a mailman was really encouraging. I didn't think much about it when I was younger, even in my 20s or 30s, but as I look back, the foundation of character and hard work and all those roots were really planted with both my father and mother.
And that had to be a valuable tool, especially knowing that education was such a valuable part. So as you come out of high school and you went on to college, I mean, did you feel that the law was going to be your calling, or did you kind of find that after the fact?
I think a little bit after the fact, because both my brother and I graduated from Boston College, and when I got out of college, I think I was out for maybe 3 or 4 years, 3 years I think, and I went back to law school, and I think that I'd worked for an insurance company during those 3 years when I was after getting out of Boston College. But I think that, to me, at that point, I felt that the law was a good opportunity or a good tool to help people to reach into other segments of the community and do the things you need to do as lawyers do in all parts of the law. So to me personally, it was very gratifying to start law school and really focus in on what I needed to do, and then obviously work my way through law school, graduate and become a lawyer in Boston, and I was lucky to work for a very talented criminal defense lawyer in the city at that time.
So as a young man, you're out of law school, getting back into the real world. It had to be an exciting time to get into being an attorney.
Well, working with the defense law firm that I work with was interesting because they were dealing with organized crime cases and federal cases more than state cases. I actually worked on the Whitey Bulger case way back in the mid-90s, where when Whitey skipped town in 1995, they were squeezing all the bookies in town. And most of the bookies, of course, would not want to say a word about Whitey.
Absolutely not.
But to hear some of the stories and be around the clients and have to deal with some of the federal authorities that were trying to find Whitey, and it was a very interesting time and a tremendous experience for a young lawyer to go through that. And then obviously many years later as a judge, when you go through all those issues, it's very helpful in understanding the trappings of the court, so to speak, and some of the things that go on outside of the courtroom.
Now, as a young attorney, as you're going through and you're getting your experience and getting trial experience, what were the things that you found to be the most vital to you? I mean, working with your client, working with the judges, what were those things that really made an impression on you?
I mean, obviously, both in criminal law and in civil, you're dealing with high stakes, people's liberty. You're dealing with many of the cases that I worked on were multi-million-dollar cases. So you have this dynamic where the emotions are really high. And that hasn't changed as a judge. But I think the most important thing is the respect of the institution. And I think sometimes we lose that in almost turning the law into a sporting event. What team wins or what team loses. It's not a sporting event. It never will be a sporting event. And it's an institution that's been around for more than 2 centuries, and it will be after we're long gone. And the purpose is to hold people accountable, but also to work within the system. And I think sometimes it's disturbing to me sometimes when I think people are disrespectful of the institution. They can disagree with the court. There's no issue with that, but not to respect the law is a different thing. And I think that's concerning. I think the lessons that I learned for over 2 decades before I became a judge was that no matter what the outcome of the case is, you have to respect the court's decision, because there's valuable information that's given to the court, but also many years of experience that a judge brings to the bench.
Well, and I would suggest to you that not only as a young attorney but throughout your career, it's a thing of being measured too. It's not being over the top, or it's taking what the actual definition of the law is and being able to apply that to everyday lives.
Yes,
would that be?
Yeah, I mean, there's the component of your upbringing. I'm talking about kind of humble upbringings, and I think in a lot of ways, my brother and I were overachievers. You should have been maybe local police or firefighters in Boston and never left. But I think that the education makes you grow, and I think it gives you opportunities, and you can use those tools, as I said earlier, to help clients and help many things in life be helpful. But what's important is having that moral compass. And I think that my parents instilled that in myself, my younger brother, and my sister as well. And having that is carried throughout for many, many years. My mother's mother had come from Ireland in 1939. Of course, in the Boston area is a great Irish descent. And she didn't come by Aer Lingus. She came by boat. And and I've been back many times to Ireland and could see the difficulties that she had as a young woman in the 30s coming across to the United States. And so the moral compass, hard work, being respectful to people. I find that in my courtroom, I expect the same. I wouldn't do that to anyone who went to their living room. I don't expect them to do that if they come to a public courthouse. But that moral compass really is so critical for anything you do in life. I don't care if you're in the financial world or you're in medicine or law, whatever it is, you need to really stay focused on that.
And those parts of that moral compass are the integrity and the honesty and the commitment that people bring to their jobs throughout every echelon of society. But as an attorney and as a judge, those are critical.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of temptations in society, and as lawyers, you need to there's an ethics code that needs to be followed. And all over society, we see in the movies and everything we see that, sometimes the moral compass is, going in the wrong direction. And for young people, even young people I see in my courtroom, they give into this temptation that can lead to consequence. So I think that it's so important to stay focused on those issues and morality-based issues, unrelated to the law, because the law is more of a consequence-based issues. But you need to understand that that's so important in everyday life.
Well, one of the things, as a young man and as you develop your career and you were very successful as a young attorney, it's working with your clients and working with those people in their interests, and that's what an attorney does, is that you become their advocate. Can you tell us a little bit about those values that you know, working with your clients?
Yeah, no, it's important, and see, that's why I think in a courtroom, if you come and watch a court proceeding, that officers of the court are the lawyers, and the lawyers have a obligation to follow the ethics code to make sure that they stay within the parameters of the law and not to interject their personal feelings. See, that's sometimes where the line gets crossed, not just with lawyers, this is with litigants as well, whether it can be, you know, people that are on trial, their families, or whether it can be law enforcement, or whether it can be the public defender's office, or whoever, the state attorney's office. You're not there to inject your personal feelings into these proceedings. You're not.
You're the basis of the law. That's the common ground for everyone.
Right. It's the commonality. It's the compass to make sure that we're not turning into a soap opera, because we have a political process that allows people to run for governor, or run for senator, or run for sheriff. You see what I'm saying? You have to bifurcate, split the issues of society versus imposing one's will on the proceedings.
And I think that's the thing with the judicial part of the thing, is that you're very firm and you have those parameters, and those parameters, we are a nation of laws, and those laws apply equally to everyone.
The independence of the judiciary is paramount. The framers of the Constitution were clear about that. That hasn't changed for more than 2 centuries. And I think that's so important that people realize that. I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, it's not a sporting event. It will never be a sporting event. It's about accountability, making sure, see, it's a balancing test. One side of the court deals with protection of society, protection of violent people in our society that can cause real harm to our community. And then this side is the balance to protect individual rights under the Constitution, which was designed to establish, such as the 6th Amendment, the Confrontation Clause, to confront your accuser.
Right.
That's why we have cross-examination. That's why we test the evidence. So it's a constant balancing test on both sides of the aisle. So sometimes we want to ensure that, one, there's not abuse of power by government, and two, that the constitutional protections are in place, so there's that test, that balancing process in all the proceedings.
And now, as a judge, you're constantly looking at that balance to make sure that one does not overweigh the other, that it's always that delicate balance of the law.
That's not easy. When you're the captain of the ship, so to speak, and you're driving the vessel, it's a driving force because emotions are high. And I think that it's an intellectual process, it's a deliberate process, and so it's really important for the court to stay focused, okay, on that ship and the direction we're going in, and not to be swayed by what the framers of the Constitution used to call the whims of emotion. We can't do that on any particular case or circumstance. We still need to stay within the parameters of the law.
And sometimes, and I think that's very eloquently put, Judge Lakin, but sometimes if you talk to people seem to have this preconceived notion that that courtrooms and judges are like a parody of the things that you see on television, where they have so-and-so judges who inject their own personality into something. Well, a courtroom is really nothing like that. It's not the kind of reality show. It is reality. Would you agree?
It's a great point. I think sometimes the people have somewhat of a jaded view of the law when they look at Judge Judy. No disrespect to her or any other person that does the television work, but look at there was an article in the American Bar Association Journal last year that said that Judge Judy made $40 million last year, and Chief Justice Roberts made $275,000. And she's essentially dealing with small claims cases and all that. And I think that what happens is society is, to some degree, is enamored with the television personalities.
Exactly.
But it's not.
It's entertainment.
Yeah, it's a noble profession. We're not here to entertain, and she is, but the rest of us are not. And that does affect our jury pools, because I have jurors that are in there in the pool that their experience with the law is seeing Judge Judy or one of the others, someone comparable, and believing that that's the way people should be treated in a courtroom. And I totally disagree with her. That is not how people are treated. We treat people in our community with respect. We don't demonize them, we don't shout at them. We don't do that.
Well, and I think that's a clear thing of being a fair and impartial, which is, what a judge, what all judges aspire to be. I want to come back to your judgeship in just a minute, but I want to, if we can, go back a little bit to your work as an attorney. Now, you've been very fortunate, you and your brother have been very fortunate over a period of time to really develop great relationships with sports and entertainment people, and several people who have gone on, done significant things in both of those fields. And recently, one of those people that you had a really good working relationship unfortunately passed away. You want to tell us a little bit about Ed Lauter?
Ed Lauter was a tremendous actor. He was in the movie industry, made over 80 movies over 4 decades. My brother Ken and I represented Ed from about 2005, I want to say. And he was in, The Longest Yard, the original one in 1974 with Clint Eastwood. I think he had, I'm sorry, with Burt Reynolds. And
Reynolds.
He had the distinction of being in the remake in 2005 with Adam Sandler, that only Burt Reynolds and Ed Lauter were in the second make of The Longest Yard. And Ed was he was from Long Island. He also came from very humble upbringings. His mother was an actress on stage. Elaine Snitch was on the show with 30 Rock, was his aunt, and so he was very close with her. And he was a very engaging person, very funny, just a great person to be around. And so we'd represent him on different movie deals, and where we'd go over the contracts with the Weinstein brothers and some other Paramount, some of the other movie studios. And interesting story, when we received a call, and I was working in Sarasota. My brother was in Boston, and it was Sarah Roberts, who works for Harvey Weinstein in New York, and she said, "We're going to cast your guy in a movie." And I said, "What's the name of the movie?" She said, "It's called The Artist." And I said, "What kind of movie?" She said, "It's a silent film." And I said, "That's never going to work." And of course, 3 years later,
and went on to become the Best Picture.
And we went to the Oscars too, and that was a tremendous experience to go out to the Oscars. And I had been to a number of Super Bowls with my brother when he represented, I think, 16. When my brother was representing NFL football players, because each player in the league gets 2 tickets.
2 tickets each.
So if you're representing in players, then they're readily available, and that's always a great experience. But it paled compared to the Oscars. I mean, the Oscars, to go there and be there with your client and be in that setting was tremendous.
And that was like a wonderful role for him as well. I mean, he was tremendous.
Yeah, he played the butler in the movie, and with Jean Dujardin from France and Benice Bourgeot as well. And Jean Dujardin had won the Oscar that night for the Best Actor. And we had a chance at the Vanity Fair party, because remember, there's multiple parties after the Oscars.
Absolutely.
And that's quite an experience as well. And at the Vanity Fair party, Jean Desjardins came in with the Oscar, and there's a photo I have in my chambers of Ed Lauter, myself, and my brother holding the Oscar, maybe an hour after he'd won it on stage in front of the world. And that was quite an experience.
Yeah. Well, it's very exciting, to have that, and having had the opportunity to briefly meet him at your investiture. It was an exciting thing. He was a upbeat, happy, talented individual, and I think somebody of his caliber will be missed.
Yeah, I mean, he was a great individual. And think about that. He flew out from Los Angeles to be here for my investiture.
That's right.
It was an amazing moment to have him here, talk about him, and some of the other professional athletes, the NFL football players that came down to Florida.
Sure.
That was a great experience for me. And I was in London when I found out in October that Ed had passed away. And I knew he was not doing well, and I had spoken to his wife about a week before I went to Europe. And he'll be missed. He just was a great inspiration to my brother and I. I think he taught us to be humble. All the success he had in acting never changed his personality. He was so engaging with everywhere we would go. We would sign autographs, talk to everybody. Yeah. He's just they don't make the types like Ed Lauter anymore.
And you could tell that the relationship that you and your brother had with him was not just a client, an attorney thing. It was of good friends.
Sure.
And a terrific guy. But you've also had the opportunity to work with other people too, and specifically one among those, Armand Assante, who you've worked with for a good many of years. Is that correct?
Armand is also a great client and a great friend, and someone who spent a great deal of time with me and my brother. I'll tell you, one thing that jumps out at Armand is that he's probably the most driven actor I've ever met. Even more than Ed Lauter, I think, in the sense that he's so into the part, so into the role. I've never seen someone have a work ethic like he. And that's why he's had so much success in the movies. I just think that he's so dedicated to what he does. He's also a great person. Armand does a great deal for the New York community. He's very active. Internationally, he's done a number of movies over in Europe, and he's also just a great person. He has 2 daughters that are very successful as well, and he reaches out to me. I just spoke to him about a week ago. He's in Switzerland. And he's just an inspiration to be around. When you see someone that has the drive and ambition, that it only helps you as an individual have the same kind of plan in life. And all these individuals are so, even the NFL football players are just so driven in their profession. And it really does reflect as you as a lawyer or whatever you do in life to be around people like Aman.
Well, and it's also, that kind of positive reinforcement type of thing too, is to have that kind of really strong relationship. But, the question I would pose to you is that as an attorney, a very successful attorney, first in Boston, then in Florida, having, had like a great deal of success working with people in the entertainment industry, working with people in the sports industry, doing, very successful litigation, there came a point in your career that you said, as an attorney, I just want to, pause for a minute, and I want to see what else I can do. And how did that transition from that successful attorney to being a judge come about?
It's a really good question. I think that, I'd spent 10 years as a Boston lawyer and 13 in Florida. And my typical weeks in Florida when I was doing litigation would be get on a plane in Tampa and fly to Miami and do a trial. Another week later, fly to Pensacola and do a trial, then fly to Jacksonville. So I was constantly on the road. There's 67 counties in Florida. I was probably in 50 of them. And so what happens after more than 2 decades, it's tiring, it's consuming. And I think that the law had been so good to me for 23 years that I felt it was important to give back to the legal profession as a judge. And I decided maybe about 4 years ago that I'd run for the position. I was fortunate to be elected, and it's a great honor. It's a tremendous honor to be in this position, to represent my community in Manatee County, but in Sarasota County, our circuit, and the people of Florida. I was just out in San Francisco in August at a conference on stand your ground law.
And that's you were one of the key people that were out there. One of the only from Florida, is that correct?
Yeah, it was on C-SPAN. It was interesting because I was the only representative judge from Florida at the conference in San Francisco, and it was a big turnout. There must have been a couple of thousand people in the audience, and the district attorney of San Francisco was there, other very distinguished lawyers and law professors from Stanford, and we talked about that. But in many ways, they were demonizing Florida, and to be honest with you, I was becoming somewhat indignant about it, to the point where I stepped onto the microphone and said, look, this state is the 4th biggest state in the nation, likely to be the 3rd biggest shortly. And we understand the problems of society. And unfortunately, in the Trayvon Martin case, it was a terrible tragedy where you had almost like a perfect storm, where you had Zimmerman, who had certain preconceived notions and reacted with violence by using a weapon, and then as well Trayvon's reaction to him. As I said, a perfect storm when I was in San Francisco. But I wanted to point out to them that the stand your ground laws are in place. And actually, in that case, there was not even a jury instruction on that. It was a standard jury instruction. And after I'd gone through that with the audience in San Francisco, this district attorney of San Francisco leaned over and with his hand on the microphone and said, Judge, you just diffused this whole audience. Because I wanted to stand up for my state, for Florida, but I also felt it was important they know all the true facts.
And I think that's important. And just briefly, if we can, what is the parameters of the stand your ground law? I mean, are there certain issues and criteria that must be met to fulfill what the legislature intended when they enacted stand your ground?
I think sometimes what escapes, maybe it's on Live at 5, or just what you see on the news for
the 2-minute soundbite.
Right. Is that there are if the defense is raised, there are pre-hearings, pre-trial motions, hearings that are held in advance of the trial, and that's when judges with many years of experience listen and decide whether or not this defense even applies, case by case. That's why in that case it did. And the audience, the people in the audience, were stunned by that in San Francisco. Because it was not a stand your ground. It was a standard instruction that was given at that trial by Judge Nelson. So my point is that the education of the law, not back to what I talked about earlier, the whims of emotion.
Right.
That's not what the law's about. And we've, the problem sometimes is that we're asking society to drop off at the front door of the courthouse in America all societal issues. We can't resolve all society's issues. These are issues that all of us as a community need to get together and discuss about young people involved with violence, about the use of weapons.
Drugs, alcohol, parental involvement, all of those things are societal. And they play some part in the judicial system, but they're not the deciding factors.
No, it's one component. I mean, a great majority of the cases we see in the felony courts, not just in Florida but in the United States, are drug and alcohol related, addiction issues. And these are issues that are very important in dealing with cases in the criminal justice system. So, and we, as judges, we want the input from all the community about how best to handle these situations. And we have very talented people in the Sheriff's Department, very talented people in the Probation Department that help and assist us in adjudicating these cases, but fashioning the best sentence when we deal with cases. So it's clearly a major issue in our society.
You can't put everybody in jail. Not everybody can go to jail, can they?
We have more than 2 million in the United States, in significant compared to other Western Europe nations and Western countries. It's, you know, it's a case-by-case scenario, and I say this to people all the time. It's one case at a time, looking at people's backgrounds, what's the best sentence to fashion. The issues involving violence are top priority with the court. And of course, we don't want anyone in our community that's going to cause harm to anyone, and those are top priorities for us. But it's the addiction issues. I know that there's been some decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court, and there's some cases involving juveniles as well, where the courts have been very clear to all judges in the United States to look closely at dealing with people that are incarcerated, that maybe there may be alternative ways to deal with it, given the cost that it takes to do that.
Yeah, and especially if you're incarcerated at a very young age, at 13 or 14 or 15 or 16, and you're given a 30, 40, 50-year sentence.
Yeah, that's concerning, and there were two major decisions in the United States Supreme Court in 2010, and one was also made in 2012. Well, the first case was Graham versus Florida by Justice Kennedy, and the second case was by Justice Kagan in Miller versus Alabama. And in both of those cases, the court made it very clear to judges that are sentencing people with life without parole that are non-homicide offenses, that we need to look very closely, because the developmental mind of a young person, the impulsiveness of a young person, and these are things that we cannot ignore. And certainly people can have differences of opinion, and certainly we look very closely at people that are young that have committed violent offenses that should be incarcerated.
Right.
But the Supreme Court is saying, hey, look, you as a sitting judge need to look at this material. There's a provision in the United States Constitution called the Supremacy Clause that mandates that judges and people in the legal world follow what the U.S. Supreme Court says. And Justice Kennedy, when I was in San Francisco at the Stand the Ground conference, he was also there, and he made a speech about these issues, and it was very interesting to hear what he had to say. So it's clearly something that we're looking closely at.
Well, let's just take a moment to talk about the ABA conference. You know, you've undertaken on your own part to really become more involved with kind of outreach as well. I mean, you've recently been out to San Francisco for the ABA conference, but you've also been in London too for a conference. Can you tell us a little about that?
And myself and a judge from Los Angeles are the only two judges from the United States that were at the European Committee meeting in London, and addressing some of the common issues that take place in the United States and in Europe, dealing with what we call cross-border matters, and where we have legal questions that arise in Europe that also can arise in the United States. You'll see that even in the cases I just talked about, the juvenile cases, that the U.S. Supreme Court looks to see how other countries may sentence people. Now, we're not bound by that, because we're bound by what takes place here in the United States under the Constitution. But it becomes
that conversation of seeing different points of view, of understanding the scope of what this country or this area is dealing with, as well as how those common matters can be solved.
Right. That's why it's important to understand, at least have some flavor of what the sentencing processes in other parts of the world, especially in Western Europe. And I think that for me, it's been a great calling. I mean, I studied international issues in undergraduate at Boston College, and so to me, it's great. It's like being an ambassador. You're representing your country on behalf of the judiciary. You're talking with very well-informed people in Europe. They're always looking to us to talk to us about how things are going on in the U.S. and especially in Florida. So to be over there on behalf of the United States, over there on behalf of Florida, is a real honor.
Why do you think these international conferences where you're able to talk and other judges, why do you think they're so important?
I think it's very important, and the reason I say that is because I think it's important to understand what's going on around the world when we deal with issues in the courts. It doesn't have to be in the criminal law. I mean, areas in the civil law and the family courts as well. We want to get a flavor from around the world what we're dealing with in the courts, and not just in Europe and other parts of the world, and understand that we, as a society, the Constitution, the American Constitution, is an evolving document.
Right.
It's a changing process. That's why the cases that come down from the Supreme Court are always changing. The Supreme Court looks at issues internationally, and as a society, we're looking at things internationally. Look how it affects our markets financially, and what we see in Europe, what we see in Greece, what we see in Portugal, what we see in Ireland. So it also affects the legal world, and we pass laws individually here in Florida, but we also have laws that affect us that come down from the Supreme Court.
And I think that's a critical thing. So there's this kind of understanding that, it's not one size fits all type of thing.
No.
There's this intricate measure of how things fit together. And I would suggest, one of the key things that comes up and has come up recently is the thing on human trafficking, which is a major issue, in the United States, but just as important an issue is in Europe. So to have that kind of understanding about what the legal ramifications are, what things can be done, that's a critical thing that all nations can come together and discuss.
Sure, and that's a big issue. It's an issue here locally in Manatee County.
Very much so.
Sarasota, Bradenton area, and all throughout Florida. They've had numerous issues in Miami on human trafficking and as well. So it's something that we need input from all our allies and friends overseas, but our people here in the United States. And it's just, it's the law, as I said, is an evolving process. It involves input from all sides when we deal with legal issues.
And I wanted to just take a moment, if we could, kind of go back a little bit, is that, you've been one of those individuals, who's been really sought after for a variety of things, and you've been a commentator on many things, on Court TV, on MSNBC, on different things. And I think it's really important to have somebody who's, one, very knowledgeable, two, who has the expertise and the insight to be able to give comment. Tell us a little bit about some of those commentaries that you were involved in.
Well, it's interesting because, when I was working in Boston, I worked with a woman named Ricky Clayman, who went to work for Court TV. Her husband is Bill Bratton, who's now the chief of police in New York. He was the chief of police of New York before, the chief of Los Angeles police. A very accomplished individual in law enforcement, great individual. And when Ricky Clayman was working for Court TV in New York, she invited me onto the shows years ago, and that's how I started working on commenting on television cases, all the way down to the Joseph Smith case that was here in Sarasota, on the Carly Brewster matter, and the Casey Anthony trial, which I did for CNN Headline News in Orlando. So it was a great experience because you had an opportunity to educate people, the United States, the viewership. It was amazing to be on television in New York at the Third Avenue studios and when Court TV, which is now True TV, but Court TV was one. I also did some work in CNN and building in Atlanta. So, but it's a good forum to talk to people about law and educate people about the law. And like I talked about earlier with some of the small claims cases you see on Judge Judy and these other shows. Right. People may have a jaded view of the law until they're really educated on how it works and what each side needs to say in a case. Right. But I think you're given that opportunity in the public forum when you're on the national television shows. And
that's why I think somebody with your ability and background and expertise in something, adding that kind of insight can best illuminate, like very complicated, legal issues. So that's a kind of a criteria from the early days of Court TV all the way up to CNN. That's a wide variety of things that you've been involved in.
Yeah, it's been a great experience. I mean, some of the biggest trials, I think I did a show on Michael Jackson's case, and that was going on in Los Angeles, and numerous other cases, in Florida. Obviously, we called in many cases in Florida. But Casey Anthony's case, for instance, the jury selection process was in Pinellas County. In that case, and I did one show in Orlando and one show in St. Pete. But the case, when I went up to Orlando, after all the shows that I'd done nationwide, I don't think I've ever seen the circus that I saw outside of that courthouse. It was just a tremendous amount of people. And I can remember they had a booth set up that I had to go in, and there was a long line. It was almost like going to the Super Bowl to walk through this line to get into the studio, which is where everybody could look into the glass. So I would turn around, and there were literally hundreds of people
watching you.
And I'd never seen that in a court proceeding. And I wondered why this case, why did it have this kind of reaction? But it was amazing to see the public feedback, and I literally was being pulled each way when I left the booth on people's opinions
Very
about the case.
emotional, very
highly
emotional.
emotional,
Yeah.
highly emotional. And as I talked about earlier about the court, in a sense, being isolated from outside causes, no matter what the cause is, because that's more for the political branches,
Right.
to run an efficient court to make sure that the justice is done without being interference from outside forces. That's so critical. And I've seen that firsthand before I was a judge, and I know how difficult that can be with people.
But that raises an interesting question. You know, as a sitting judge now, and what do you like to see in your courtroom? You know, how important is, you know, preparation and, you know, research and all of those things? When you know, convene your courtroom, what do you like to see, you know, from the way of preparation?
I think it's important. I think I bring the same work ethic that my father had growing up, seeing his dedication to his work. And I observe that. If I'm on the road and I'm at an airport and I see the Hertz bus driver, if he's dressed in his uniform and how he helps people, I just observe people do little things all the time. I think it's important having that work ethic, no matter what you do for work.
I agree.
So I say that to the people in my courtroom that are on probation, that you need to comply and do these things that I told you to go seek gainful employment, you need to do it. So what's important is that I use the same work ethic I had when I was a lawyer. I'm going to go in advance. I'm going to read as many files as I can read. Fortunately, our clerk of court, Chip Shores, does a great job, and we're on the cutting edge of technology.
That's true.
We just had a group of judges come in from Illinois who sat in my courtroom watching how we use electronic media to go through our cases online. We don't have any actual files in the courtroom. Everything's electronic.
We helped Chip Shore do a little video about that. He is very technologically
Tremendous,
savvy.
absolutely tremendous.
And it's a great asset, I would imagine, to you and other judges, instead of, you know, stacks and stacks of file, to be able to call up things, you know, readily and efficiently.
And what happens is that I have it available on my iPad, so at night, the night before, I'm able to read 20 police reports.
Wow.
So when I get into the courtroom and I hear testimony from a witness or a police official, I know because I've read the report in advance. And there's other notations. I'm going to read those notes before you're on the witness stand. So I want an opportunity to make sure that the information that's coming in front of me the next morning is correct and not something that someone is making up as they go or can't validate what they've already reduced to writing. So our job is to make sure that it's run efficiently, but also to make sure the recordation that comes into court is correct and not someone that's involved with puffery or trying to embellish facts to fix the case. And that's very important for the court to know that, but also very important for the lawyers on cross-examination to bring out inconsistencies, things of that nature, so the court can make a true evaluation. I don't want to be stuck guessing or speculating. So my work ethic is the same I had as a lawyer. I need to work consistently into the evening every night. I'll be on at 10 at night reviewing documentation, so in the morning at 9 when court opens that we have as much knowledge about the cases we can have.
And I think that's, you know, very detailed, and that's, you know, and it relates back to those early days as a young man, where you have that work ethic to, you know, to follow, dot the I's, cross the T's. But, you know, talk with me for a moment about judicial temperament and those qualities of character that you bring into the courtroom. You know, what are those, you know, qualities of patience and fairness, and how are they critical when you're sitting on the bench?
I think it's an absolute paramount. It's so important in the legal world to have judges that have the temperament. I said earlier, it's highly emotional at times. And I think that if you can maintain order in the courtroom, and I'm very grateful because I have a group of great people around me. I have you know, the court reporter, I have the clerk of courts, I have 2 deputies that watch me all day. And so I have just tremendous nucleus of people around me. But what you need to do is, you know, maintain order and try to be as human to people as possible. That's my task. You know, it's a public courthouse. The lawyers don't own it. The judges don't own it. And in my mind, it's a public forum for grievances. And I want people to have the opportunity to be heard. Now, what I don't like is people that are reactive to what other people say without having the opportunity to be fully heard. So I think it's so important. I have a policy of not interrupting lawyers, not interrupting litigants, and I don't expect them to interrupt me when I say something. So I think just common decency, but it's so important for people to have their say in a public courthouse, whether someone agrees or disagrees. I don't like facial reactions, people that in the audience. I'm like, it's disrespectful. So I think what we're looking to do is have everybody have their grievance heard, have all the evidence out in a case, and then if it's a jury trial, the jury can make the decision. If it's a bench trial, then the court can make a decision. So it's just a matter of maintaining your composure, making sure the courts run efficiently, and never letting the whims of emotion, so to speak, dictate the proceedings.
Well, I would say, Judge, that kind of temperament is kind of a critical part of of any judge's ability to be able to be measured and at the same time very patient, because some proceedings can go on for a while.
Absolutely. I mean, you're going to have circumstances where people want to editorialize and impose their own will on the proceedings. That happens often. And if lawyers are fortunate enough to object, there's a rule that prevents that. But there are circumstances where the court just needs to step in and manage the courtroom without the editorial comments or people trying to impose their view of morality on other people, because it's not a morality-based proceeding.
And that's what was going to lead to my next question, is that your knowledge of the law has got to be quite extensive. You have to know the full gamut of what is being discussed, and that goes into that research that you have to do, or into case law that you have to be able to relate to. And so there's a tremendous amount of work involved in each and every case. Would you agree?
Yes, and I think it's incumbent on the lawyers to present the case to the best of their ability, and that's not always the case. But of course, we're looking for as much input as possible from the judge's standpoint of view. But it's important, I think, for the court to do the research on their own volition, for the court to read the updated cases that are coming from the Florida Supreme Court or from the Florida District Courts of Appeal or the U.S. Supreme Court. So we're aware of the cutting edge of criminal law, or civil law, or divorce law, or whatever the circumstance may be.
Exactly.
So we need to have that information in front of us, and we need to do that on our own volition.
So, Judge, we're kind of winding down here a little bit, and I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about the responsibility, the heavy responsibility of being a judge, and what that responsibility entails. But first, I'd like to, when you first became a judge, obviously there were a few challenges. What did you find was your biggest challenge of becoming a judge?
The transition, I think, is difficult if you've been a lawyer for a long time, because you're not an advocate anymore.
Nah.
And you're not in the fray, so to speak, in the sense that you're fighting for a client.
Right.
And that's difficult, because now you have to have more of a poker face, so to speak. And you have to be able to detach yourself from the advocate role. And the role of the judge essentially is to run the efficient court, to make sure the proceedings are run properly, timely. So it definitely is different, but I feel that if you do this job correctly, you can make a tremendous influence on people's lives. You can have a direct input, and dramatic to some degree, with people in front of you. So it's, as I said earlier, it's a tremendous opportunity. It's a great and humbling experience to be in this position. And I think that the judges in our society often don't have an opportunity publicly to talk about what they feel, but I think most of them will tell you that they're all honored to be in the position.
Well, and that's a critical thing, and I think you very eloquently said this earlier, is that these are public courthouses. They belong to the people. People are there, and sometimes when people go into courthouses, they're unaware, they might be frightened, they might be unsure of what's going to happen. And I think, being in a courtroom with a judge who's not only understanding, but cognizant of those type of things really helps people through that process.
Yeah, you have people that appear in front of the court that have never had any problems with the law, whether they're for a divorce proceeding, or civil case, or probate matter, or criminal matter. They're not familiar with the trappings of the court. They're not familiar with the proceedings. So I think it's incumbent upon the court to explain that to people that come into the public courthouse, and explain to them, how the proceedings work if they don't have a lawyer. Remember, in many of the divorce proceedings, people represent themselves. We call pro se litigants, and that's difficult. And I know my colleagues that sit in the family court deal with that often. It's very expensive to hire private lawyers. So it's definitely something where the judges are mindful of that, and they have to be patient to some degree with people that are feeling, in their minds, the most difficult part of their life, whether it's custody issues with their children or divorce proceedings involving visitation, or whether it's a civil case that you just lost $1 million, or whether your son's going to the county jail for 11 months.
Right.
So they're all highly emotional.
And I think too, having that ability to understand that where people are really helps that process along. And it would seem to me it would help the courtroom procedures be a little bit more relaxed too. Is that a fair assumption?
I think that you have to have a regimented process in the
Very
courtroom.
much so.
It's critical to do that because then people will lose respect for the institution, and I've talked about it earlier. But I also think it's important that they're educated and they understand the proceedings and they're given the opportunity to be heard.
That's, I think.
See, that's so important because people, whether it's meritorious or not meritorious, the point is that someone may have 1 or 10 or 5% of that argument is legitimate. We need to hear that argument.
Yeah.
And it's not someone else's way to impose themselves and stop people from being heard. And I think that needs to be done.
And Judge, what would you say to people or the community at large about what they think is the biggest misconception about courts and judges? And how would you answer that misconception?
I think it's important for people to hear all of the proceedings. I think sometimes with the press or the media, and even my personal experience and with the national media and Court TV and MSNBC and the other mediums, is that there's only bits and pieces that people come into the courtroom. The trial lasts the whole week. Someone shows up at Friday at 4 o'clock.
Does 2 minutes?
And my mind is it's so important to see the totality of the process. And if you see Monday through Friday and you hear from 20 witnesses or 15 witnesses and you take this all in, you can see how the proceeding itself unfolded and what led to what result. And so rather than just coming in at the last minute
Right.
and only seeing that one part that might be in the newspaper for 2 paragraphs with having no clue on the totality of the circumstances, that to me is really important. And see, then you can see why the court may have gone in a certain direction
Right.
when they heard from witness on Wednesday or witness on Tuesday, that outcome that affected Friday evening when the jury came back. It's really important.
Instead of that just little news blurb or that 2-minute soundbite,
Right.
that kind of ignites the situation.
Right.
Now, Judge, first of all, I want to thank you again for taking the time out of your very busy schedule. Being an attorney for many, many years, being a judge now as you move into what is this, to be year 3? Of
Year 2.
Year 2 of your
Right.
judgeship?
Right.
And I'm sure there'll be many more years ahead of you of being a judge. What do you look forward to? What are those things that you look forward to as being a judge?
It's a great job. I think I talked about earlier the importance you make in the community. From my perspective, I think it's important to continue to stay focused on my task, to stay focused on running an efficient court, maybe to get into some other areas of the court other than criminal law, because I think there's a certain time span that you spend in one division onto the next division.
Correct.
So it's important, I think, to get into as many divisions as possible down the road, but to continue to stay focused on my task and obviously being in a very privileged position to be here on behalf of all the other people in our community, to make sure that all of us communicate with one another, that all of us are out there and continue to have the best possible justice system that we can provide in Sarasota, Manatee, DeSoto counties.
Well, Judge Lakin, again, thank you for being here. And I would welcome you back, and perhaps for future programs, where perhaps you could host a forum where you want to talk about the stand your ground law, or about human trafficking, or about those other issues that have deep both legal and societal implications. And we'd welcome you back at any time to do this. I would say that over those years, from those beginnings back in Boston through all the entertainment and sports figures that you've done, Manatee County and Sarasota and this circuit is very fortunate to have a man not only of your expertise but also your insight sitting on the bench.
Well, I appreciate that, and Manatee County's been very good to my family and my wife and I, my wife Joanne, and my 2 children are products of the public school here in Manatee County. They were very young when they came to school here, and they've done very well, and I think that it's a great place to raise a family. I'm thrilled to live in the Sarasota, Bradenton area, and it's just been, I've been very lucky and very blessed to meet some very great people, and it's been a great experience to be part of the community here.
Judge Lakin, again, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll welcome you to have you back at any time, to discuss other issues that this community might find interesting and vital, from community interest.
Thank you, Charles. Great to be here.
And thank you for joining us on this special edition of Up Close on METV.